All right, folks, it's Bass Action back in action here. In this video, we're going to take some time to just understand what a radian is. And the big idea, just from the very beginning, just to get your head around, is that a radian is simply another way to measure an angle. In the same way that we could measure our distance in inches or feet or miles or kilometers, radians are just another way to measure angles. It's just that up till now, you've only had one way to measure an angle, and that's been degrees. So we're going to do a little compare and contrast on here, comparing radians and degrees once we get an understanding of what a radian is. All right, let's first look at our definition. The definition of a radian is a portion of a circle, okay? And remember, the circle itself is the circumference of the circle, okay? So that's important to understand, that the circle itself is the circumference. Okay, so it's a portion of the circumference that's going to equal the radius. And that can seem a little weird initially because circles are curved, but the radius, we understand, is a nice straight object. So if you have this at home or you have a circle, what you can do is we can go ahead and we could measure out a radius here. So we've got this radius, and then if you look at this picture, you can see that I've got these little dots around the circle, and that these are going to be important to us. So if you have something kind of bendable, could be maybe a piece of yarn or something like that. In my classroom, I've got some wiki sticks, but if you measure out this radius and you could bend it along the circle, what you would see is that those two measurements actually are the same, okay? Because I've actually measured out several radians for you. So if we think of this as one unit, okay, that unit could be in whatever we would want. What you would find is that this measurement is the same as this measurement, going back to those good old geometry tick marks, okay? So this could be then represented as 1 radian, okay? That's also abbreviated 1 rad. Sounds kind of funny, I know. It sounds very 80s, okay? So this would be the length of 1 radian. Now, what you want to start to kind of think about is that if we had measured out an angle that was to here, about how big would that angle look like? And we can start to get a feel for that angle, and that's important for us, and we can think of 1 radian is somewhere about 60 degrees, okay? Now, if we keep measuring these out, these other dots represent additional radians, so this is also 1 radian, or 1 rad, okay, here to here, and then this would be another one. Okay, from the dots to the dots would be 1 radian. And I said that it was about 60 degrees, and that would make sense because if this is about 60 and this is about 60 and this is about 60, it's clearly not exactly 60 because that would have put me perfectly halfway around the circle, but approximately 60 seems to be about right. So if we keep going, what we can find then is that, sure enough, then we've got another radian here. So here's another radian from here to here, from dot to dot, and then I've got another one. We just keep going, dot to dot, and dot to dot again. So when we look at this all the way around the circle, what we can see is that we've got 6 of these radians around the circle, but then we've got this little bit that's extra. Okay, so let's go back to our half circle, okay, where I had these 3 radians and I had this little bit extra. Let's think about what we were thinking earlier, back to this definition, that a radian is a portion of the circumference. Well, if we go back to our geometry again and we think, oh, the circumference of a circle has a formula, it's 2 pi r. Okay, and then if we think about that r, that radius, okay, if we think of that as being that 1 unit, then if we substitute that in, what we have here then is that the circumference is 2 pi, okay? So 2 pi, whatever it would be. That means that if we rotate all the way around the circle, the number of radians all the way around the circle should be 2 pi. Well, we know that pi is approximately 3.14, which means all the way around the circle is about 6.28 then. 2 times our 3.14. And that would make sense. We've got 6 of these dots and this little bit more, and that little bit more is this 0.28. That means that halfway around the circle then would have been our pi radians, And of course, pi is approximately 3.14. And that also then makes sense because we've got 3 radians and a little bit more, and that little bit more is that 0.14, okay? So what we want to start to get comfortable with is being able to visualize where these dots are, because these are going to help to make that transition for you from measuring in degrees to measuring in radians a little bit easier. So we've got some mental images that we want to get into our head down here at the bottom, and we're going to think in terms of a few little summaries. These are going to help us later. Half the circle, what we just saw up above there, is pi radians, okay? Or again, you could think of that as approximately 3.14, okay? Then half the circle is going to be 180 degrees, okay? Now, this connection is going to be important to us when we actually do some full conversions later. Now, let's take a look at these little mental images. These are going to help you as you start to do our transition. So 2 pi, if I think 2 pi radians, what I know is that that's going to end up being approximately 6.28, although we won't work with the decimals a lot. But visually, that means that we have rotated all the way around the circle. So all of these ways of measuring a rotation would be exactly the same. 2 pi, 6.28, or 360 degrees are all the same. Pi then would be halfway around the circle. And again, we want to always be thinking about how many radians or dots, if you want to think about it from up above, 3.14 or 180 degrees. You'll also notice that on these, I didn't actually write out rad. Typically, if it doesn't have the degree symbol, we understand that it is in radians. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting. So we've got the whole circle that was 2 pi, and then when we cut that in half, we had pi. Now, if we take this pi and we cut that in half again, and we only rotate half of this, we get our next picture, and that's only going to rotate up to here, okay? So if pi was 180 degrees, then pi over 2 is going to be 90 degrees, and if we type that into your calculator that you've got there at home, 3.14 divided by 2 is going to get you approximately 1.57. And if we come up here again, what you can see here is, sure enough, that's about 1 dot, and sure enough, about halfway between these two. So the more you can start to picture where those dots around the circle land will help you do these conversions and get these ideas in your head. Now, instead of having half the circle, we can either think of this next one as the half circle divided into 4 pieces, so the 180 into 4 pieces, or we can think of it as this pi over 2, this one right here, divided by 2. So whatever way your brain kind of thinks about it, but either way, what we're going to have here is we're going to have our 45 degrees, and that's only going to come to about here. Okay, and if we type that one in our calculator, we'll get 0.785 radians. So it's a little bit past the first, or a little bit before, I should say, that first dot. It's not to the full dot yet. Pi over 3, okay, we're going to take this half circle, this one right here, and we're going to divide it into 3 pieces. So we're thinking 180 divided into 3 pieces, and that gets us to 60 degrees. Now, if we take that 3.14 and we divide that into 3, we're going to get approximately 1.05, and that goes back to the original thing that I talked about at the very, very, very beginning of this, that 1 dot, or the first dot, or 1 radian, is about 60 degrees. So sure enough, that first dot is about 60 degrees, just what we expected. And then our last one here, we're either going to think our pi, our 180, divided into 6 pieces, or we're going to think our pi over 3 divided into 2. So that's going to get us to 30 degrees. And that's going to take us to about right here. And since it's going to be half of that, should be about half a radian. And sure enough, our 3.14 divided by 6 is going to get us about 0.52 radians. Okay? So these mental images are going to be helpful because we're going to use these a lot. But of course, there are an infinite number of angles around that circle. So on the next video, we're going to look at doing conversions of angles that aren't one of these nice ones or multiples of these nice angles.